He was once just a muddy country farmer, yet he single-handedly created Japan's most feared assassination group in history. He not only slaughtered enemies, but even forced his own subordinates to commit seppuku. He dyed the entire royal city blood red, all to uphold a faith that had already been abandoned by the times. Behind this blood-soaked blade lies a hidden truth that will leave you in deep silence. The story of the 2021 film Burning Sword begins with a young man named Toshizo Hijikata. It was the Bakumatsu period in Bushutama, where the Tokugawa shogunate's rule was collapsing, and Toshizo Hijikata was nothing more than a rural youth who brawled in the fields. Just as he himself coldly recalled, although he came from commoner stock, he was naturally combative and trained every day with Isami Kondo and Soji Okita in a rundown dojo, practicing the so-called country swordsmanship of the Tenin Rishin Ryu that was mocked by others. Toshizo Hijikata never wanted to settle down and be a farmer. Fighting coursed through his veins, and he dreamed of one day becoming a true samurai. But here is a detail that most people overlook. The film hints very early on through the scene of Toshizo Hijikata peddling his hometown's secret remedy, Ishida Sanyaku, that he possessed an extremely sharp business mind and organizational discipline. He was not just a brute who could only swing a sword, he knew how to package himself and how to bind people's hearts with profit, which was also the underlying logic that later enabled him to turn the Shinsengumi into a precise killing machine. At this time, the outside world was rocked by the arrival of the black ships, with foreigners using cannons to force open Japan's doors. The emperor ordered the expulsion of the barbarians, and the whole of Japan fell into extreme frenzy. Under the guidance of his mentor, Toshizo Hijikata sold off his family assets to acquire a famous blade called Izumi no Kami Kanesada, and set off with Isami Kondo and the others on the bloody road to Kyoto. They were initially recruited into the Roshigumi, thinking they could achieve great deeds, only to discover that the leader Hachiro Kiyokawa merely wanted to use them to rebel against the shogunate. Toshizo Hijikata saw through the conspiracy without hesitation. Rather than become someone else's pawn, they would build a new organization themselves. So they joined forces with the violent swordsman Serizawa Kamo from the Mito domain and pledged allegiance to the Kyoto Protectorate and the Aizu domain. Toshizo Hijikata and Isami Kondo and the others were appointed as the Mibu Roshigumi and tasked with maintaining order in Kyoto. But Serizawa Kamo within the group was a massive liability. Serizawa Kamo, relying on his superior swordsmanship, drank heavily every day and even used cannons to extort merchants and abduct women. His actions seriously tarnished the reputation of this newly formed unit. Toshizo Hijikata knew full well that a force without discipline was nothing but a scattered mess. To purge the inside, he decided to use the most iron-fisted methods to discipline this ragtag bunch. He modeled the unit after Western military systems and established the extremely strict Kyuchu Hodo. Do not violate the spirit of Bushido, do not desert privately, do not raise funds privately. Violating any one of them meant only one outcome: seppuku. When Isami Kondo questioned the meaning of this Bushido that owed loyalty to no lord, Toshizo Hijikata responded with extreme coldness and firmness. Uphold Bushido for the Bushido that has already been abandoned. Creating a Bushido that maintains the Shogunate feudal system while borrowing from Western military organizational methods, this is the Bushido of our Shinsengumi. This scene actually hints that from the very beginning, Toshizo Hijikata was not loyal to any specific lord or empty slogan. What he was loyal to was the order and rules he had built with his own hands. This line of dialogue directly illuminates the core essence of the Shinsengumi, in a chaotic world, using extreme violence and discipline to maintain a faith that is on the verge of collapse. Afterward, Toshizo Hijikata set a trap, forcing Serizawa Kamo's close aide Nishiki Nimi to commit seppuku, and on a night of pouring rain, led men to sneak into Serizawa Kamo's bedroom and hack his former ally to death with a flurry of blades. From that moment on, the Shinsengumi fell completely into the hands of Toshizo Hijikata and Isami Kondo. As the Shinsengumi's power expanded wildly, Toshizo Hijikata, during one pursuit operation, accidentally met the painter Oyuki. Oyuki's husband had once been a Choshu domain spy who was brutally killed by his colleagues. Toshizo Hijikata had originally held only a casual attitude toward women, but in Oyuki he saw a loneliness similar to the depths of his own soul. One of them depicted the desolate wilderness of the end times on canvas, while the other carved a bloody path through reality with swords. In this cold and cruel battlefield of slaughter, Oyuki became the only safe harbor where Toshizo Hijikata could let down his guard. But the wheels of the times gave them little room for tenderness. The Choshu domain's anti-shogunate activists were plotting an earth-shattering conspiracy. 別府に乗じて京の各地に火を放ち、京都守護職を惨殺。同時に御所へ乱入して帝を奪い長州に同座する。Toshizo Hijikata keenly sensed the murderous intent. He dispatched the spy Susumu Yamazaki to infiltrate and investigate.
池田屋放火数件がこれらの常宿になっている節がある。山崎君は客のふりをして池田屋に投入しろ。
どんな客に化けまようか。
薬屋。
Finally pinpointing the enemy's hiding place in the vast sea of people, the Ikedaya. The ensuing Ikedaya raid was the Shinsengumi's brightest moment in history, yet it was also the turning point that sent them tumbling into the abyss. Isami Kondo led Soji Okita and a few other top elites, charging into the Ikedaya like tigers descending the mountain. In the close quarters bloodbath within that cramped space, the Shinsengumi displayed a terrifying strangling capability. But the hidden detail was that the genius swordsman Soji Okita suddenly coughed up blood frantically during the fierce fighting and collapsed in a pool of blood. He had contracted the incurable disease of the time, tuberculosis. This not only foreshadowed Soji Okita's personal tragic fate, but was also a huge metaphor planted by the director. The Shinsengumi was just like Soji Okita's body, on the surface overwhelmingly powerful, yet internally already beginning to be mercilessly devoured by the torrent of the times. Toshizo Hijikata then led the main force to arrive and captured all the Choshu activists in one sweep. Overnight, the Shinsengumi shook the world and became the most dreaded name in Kyoto. But the peak of fame is often the starting point of decline. After the Ikedaya incident, the Shinsengumi's ranks swelled rapidly and became infiltrated by a large number of scheming politician samurai. Isami Kondo grew arrogant from his achievements, began acting like a daimyo, and became obsessed with political maneuvering alongside shogunate officials. Meanwhile, the unit's chief Sannan Keisuke felt utter despair over the Shinsengumi's excessive reliance on slaughter and Toshizo Hijikata's cold-blooded machine-like management. Sannan Keisuke ultimately chose to violate the Kyuchu Hodo and desert privately. This was an unsolvable death sentence. According to the rules, deserters must commit seppuku. As former comrades in arms who had fought side by side, Toshizo Hijikata still sent men to pursue him and coldly enforced the Iron Law. The moment Sannan Keisuke fell after committing seppuku, the internal cracks within the Shinsengumi were fully exposed. In order to maintain the perfect organization in his heart, Toshizo Hijikata did not hesitate to sever all personal emotions with his own hands. The wheels of history began mercilessly crushing this group of rebels against the old era. As the Satsuma and Choshu domains secretly formed an alliance, the anti-shogunate movement erupted like a volcano and became unstoppable. And within the Shinsengumi, crisis struck again. Kashitaro Ito used the pretext of becoming imperial tomb guards to lead a group of elites, including the genius swordsman Hajime Saito, away from the Shinsengumi, and secretly plotted to assassinate Isami Kondo in order to offer a token of loyalty to the anti-shogunate faction. Toshizo Hijikata knew full well that any soft-heartedness in the face of epical change would lead to total defeat. He took the initiative without hesitation. Setting an ambush at Aburano-koji and completely annihilating the Ito faction. But here, many people overlook the enormous inner turmoil within Toshizo Hijikata. The brothers who had once fought side by side solely to build the strongest samurai unit could now only turn their swords on each other. In front of Oyuki, he shed all his disguises and admitted that he too felt fear. What he feared was not death, but having to watch helplessly as the beliefs he had built with his own hands gradually deteriorated amid political intrigue. In October 1867, the 15th shogun Yoshinobu Tokugawa made a decision that shocked the world: the return of political power to the emperor. This decision instantly stripped the Shinsengumi of its legitimate object of loyalty, turning them from imperial forces into an extremely awkward guard unit. Immediately afterward, the Battle of Toba Fushimi broke out. This was the first modern war the Shinsengumi faced. The swords that had once been invincible in street fights now appeared so ridiculous and pale against the dense fire of Western cannons and rifles. But what happened next was the most despairing scene of all. The Shinsengumi fought desperately at the front lines under cannon fire, yet the supreme commander they served, Yoshinobu Tokugawa, and the lord of the Aizu domain, upon seeing the imperial brocade banner raised, abandoned all the frontline soldiers and fled back to Edo overnight aboard warships. Those so-called high-ranking samurai who had always looked down on Toshizo Hijikata trampled loyalty to pieces in the face of life and death. Isami Kondo was struck in the shoulder by a rifle during the battle and could no longer wield a sword. The genius swordsman Soji Okita's tuberculosis worsened. He was isolated in a cold little hut, and until the moment before his death, he still fantasized that Toshizo Hijikata would bring him his beloved Kiku Ichimonji to see him But in the end, he could only die alone in the storeroom of the Uekiya, uncared for and in utter desolation. The brothers of the Shieiken who had once shaken Kyoto were now either dead or fled, leaving only Toshizo Hijikata standing alone amid the ruins of the era. Many viewers seeing this point would think that Toshizo Hijikata would next choose to commit seppuku and die for his cause, but the opposite was true. He made a move that shocked everyone. He cut off the top knot that symbolized the samurai soul and put on a Western military uniform. This was not a compromise with fate, but the strongest rebellion against that hypocritical old era. When facing his former comrades, he revealed the bloody truth of this war with crystal clarity. Toshizo Hijikata's gaze was piercing as he said coldly, "Those so-called learned people are simply spreading everywhere and establishing ideologies that suit their own interests. A leopard cannot change its spots. That is how we have reached today." This soul-piercing line completely tore away the hypocritical masks of the Restoration activists and Shogunate officials. What revere the emperor and expel the barbarians? What Bushido spirit? None of it was anything more than a pretext for politicians to seize power. Toshizo Hijikata saw through everything, yet he still chose to draw his sword. He no longer fought for the Tokugawa shogunate, nor for the Aizu domain. He fought only for the three words Shinsengumi, only for the purest fighting instinct in his own heart. Toshizo Hijikata led the remnants northward, eventually retreating to the freezing cold Ezo territory in Hokkaido, where they established the Ezo Republic and mounted a final desperate resistance at Hakodate. There, fate arranged his last reunion with Oyuki. Oyuki had not only survived, but had become a nurse in the field hospital. But Toshizo Hijikata knew that this was already the final endgame. In the hopeless situation of the government force's full-scale siege, Toshizo Hijikata entrusted a farewell letter and a photograph of himself in Western military uniform to a man named Konosuke Shichiri. This was a powerfully shocking metaphor. Konosuke Shichiri had once been a Choshu domain spy whose wrist had been severed by Soji Okita. He was the deadliest enemy of the Shinsengumi's deadliest enemies. Yet, now he had donned a government army uniform and transformed into a high official. People like Konosuke Shichiri, who adapted to the times and shifted with the wind, survived and became the winners of the new era, while someone like Toshizo Hijikata, who remained steadfast to the end, was destined to be crushed by the times. In this final battle with no chance of victory, Toshizo Hijikata refused everyone's pleas to stop. He chose not to use a Western rifle, but instead mounted his horse, drew the longsword that had accompanied him all his life, and charged alone toward the government force's dense rifle positions. Facing countless black gun muzzles, he showed not the slightest fear. His eyes remained as sharp as a leopard's, and he announced for the last time the title he had been proud of all his life.
Shinsengumi Fukuchou, Hijikata Toshizo. Sanbofu ni yogaru.
As the deafening gunfire rang out, the man once called the Baragaki of Ishida village fell on the battlefield he had desired most. With his blood, he drew a tragic yet perfect period at the end of the samurai era.